Lieutenant Zoe Huxley had exactly 3 thoughts in her head when the coolant line ruptured. 1. This was supposed to be a routine drill. 2. Routine drills don't typically involve plasma fires hot enough to melt bulkhead plating. 3. She was about to have a really bad day. Orbital Platform Helix 9 wasn't exactly the crown jewel of the Galactic Union's military installations. It was more like the odd sock. You know, functional, mostly forgotten, shoved into a drawer somewhere in the back of the cosmic closet. Humanity's presence here was newer than the coffee stains on the break room counter, and about as respected. 6 months ago, Earth had finally been granted provisional membership in the Union, after decades of knocking on the door like an overeager neighbor asking to borrow sugar. Zoe had been assigned to the platform as part of the Cultural Integration Initiative, which was bureaucratic speak for, let's see if the hairless apes can follow basic instructions without breaking something. She was mid-rank, mid-30s, and midway through her 3rd cup of what the Quilxians generously called coffee, but tasted more like battery acid filtered through regret. Her current assignment? Babysitting 3 cadets through Combat Simulation Module 12. Hixmoth was first on her roster. Male Quilxian, insectoid species, 4 arms that could punch through titanium, and an exoskeleton that made him look like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a tank. He was competent, efficient, and had the personality of a chess computer. His species didn't do small talk. They did survival optimization. Colpix was his counterpart, also Quilxian, also built like she could headbutt her way through a freight door. Female, though gender distinctions in insectoid species were more about reproductive function than anything humans would recognize. She was quieter than Hixmoth, which was saying something, and had a disconcerting habit of clicking her mandibles when she was thinking. Then there was Lumi. Lumi was Ondari, amphibian, skin like wet jade, regenerative abilities that meant they could regrow a limb in about 6 weeks. Their species didn't bother with gender binaries. Ondari shifted reproductive roles based on environmental needs. Lumi was younger than the other 2, eager in a way that reminded Zoe of puppies, and had a tendency to ask questions that started with, "But what if we tried?" which was probably how they'd ended up in this mess. The simulation was supposed to be simple. Breach and clear scenario, hostiles in a confined space, standard tactical response. The kind of thing you could run in your sleep. Except someone, and Zoe was going to find out who, had failed to properly isolate the reactor coolant system from the simulation grid. So when Lumi had enthusiastically lobbed a practice grenade at a holographic enemy, the concussive feedback had traveled through the system like a ripple in a pond, found a weak point in the EHO coolant coupling, and boom! Well, not boom exactly. More like a hiss, followed by a spray of superheated liquid that turned into vapor on contact with air, followed by alarms that could wake the dead, followed by the kind of fire that doesn't care about your feelings or your fire suppression systems. Zoe had been in the observation deck when it happened. She saw the flash, heard the alarms, and watched the simulation chamber fill with smoke in about 8 seconds flat. Her comms crackled. "All personnel, evacuate Section 9 immediately. Bulkhead closure in 90 seconds. Repeat, 90 seconds to containment protocol." Around her, the other supervisors were already moving. A Fentari officer, reptilian, cold-blooded in more ways than one, was sealing his station and heading for the exit. A Vrelian technician, who looked like someone had given an octopus too many limbs and a bad attitude, was doing the same. Zoe looked at the viewport into the chamber. 3 heat signatures. Motionless. Her 3 cadets. She hit her comm. "This is Huxley. I have 3 personnel down in Section 9. Request emergency extraction." The response was immediate and unhelpful. "Negative, Huxley. Toxic fumes detected. Environmental integrity compromised. Containment protocols cannot be delayed. I said, I have 3 personnel. Acknowledged. Medical teams will retrieve remains after containment and atmospheric purge. You have 60 seconds to clear the area. Remains. Zoe stared at the viewport. Through the smoke, she could just barely make out Hicksmoth's bulk, collapsed near the far wall. Colpix was closer, maybe 10 meters from the exit hatch. She couldn't see Lumi. 60 seconds. She did the math. It was bad math. The kind of math that doesn't have a happy ending. Her environmental suit was in the locker behind her. The chamber was 30 meters across. The cadets were unconscious, which meant dead weight. Hicksmoth alone probably massed twice what she did. The smoke was toxic. Oxygen deprivation in about 15 seconds without a suit. Around her, the observation deck was empty. Everyone else had already evacuated. Smart people. Following protocol. Doing the logical thing. Zoe had never been accused of being overly logical. She grabbed her environmental suit, started sealing it on as she ran. The helmet locked with a hiss. Her heads-up display flickered to life, already screaming warnings at her about atmospheric conditions, temperature readings, structural integrity. She ignored all of it. The emergency override on the observation deck hatch took 3 seconds to activate. The hatch to the simulation chamber took 5 more. The heat hit her like a physical wall even through the suit. Her display immediately went red across the board. Warning! Extreme temperature detected. Warning! Toxic atmosphere. Warning! Oxygen supply at 92%. Warning! Yeah, I get it, Zoe muttered, and stepped into the fire. Smoke everywhere. Thick, black, the kind that turned visibility into a suggestion. Her suit's sensors were trying to map the space, painting wireframe outlines in her visor. She followed them toward the first heat signature. Hicksmoth. He was face down, or what passed for face down when you had a body plan designed by geometry on hallucinogens. His breathing was shallow, unconscious, not dead. His exoskeleton had probably saved him from the worst of it, but the fumes had gotten to him anyway. Zoe grabbed 2 of his 4 arms and pulled. Nothing happened. She pulled harder. Still nothing. "Oh, come on," she grunted, resetting her stance. Low gravity on the platform helped, but Hicksmoth wasn't exactly a featherweight. She leveraged her whole body into it, feet braced against the deck plating, and hauled. He moved. Barely. She dragged him backward, centimeter by centimeter, her suit's servos whining in protest. Her oxygen was at 88%. The heat was cooking her even through the thermal protection. Somewhere behind her, a support beam groaned and collapsed with a crash that sent sparks fountaining into the smoke. 10 meters to the hatch, then 8, then 5. She got Hicksmoth through the opening and into the corridor beyond, dumped him on the deck, turned around. 41 seconds left, back into the fire. Colpix was closer, but her position was worse, half buried under a collapsed equipment rack. Zoe shoved the metal frame aside, her suit's strength augmentation doing most of the work. Colpix's mandibles twitched. Still alive. "Hang on," Zoe said, mostly to herself because Colpix couldn't hear her. She got her arms under the Quilxian's thorax and lifted. Her oxygen hit 68%. The visor display was strobing warnings now, red text cascading across her vision. She couldn't see properly. Didn't matter. The hatch was behind her. She walked backward, counting steps, dragging Colpix's weight. 1, 2, 3. Her boot hit something and she stumbled, nearly went down, caught herself, kept moving. 4, 5, 6. The hatch. She maneuvered Colpix through it, laid her next to Hicksmoth. 28 seconds. She could leave now, 2 out of 3. Not bad odds. Heroic, even. Most species would call it a miracle. Zoe looked back into the simulation chamber. Where was Lumi? Her sensors were dying. Interference from the heat and the smoke turning them into static. She squinted at the wireframe overlay, trying to parse the flickering images. There. Faint heat signature. Far corner. Buried under what looked like half the ceiling. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Zoe said, and her oxygen counter hit 51%. She went back in. The smoke was worse now. Her suit's filters were clogged, struggling. Each breath tasted like copper and ash. The heat was a living thing, pressing against her from all sides. Her gloves were starting to blister on the inside. She reached Lumi. The Ondari was pinned under a section of bulkhead plating, maybe 200 kilos of metal. Their skin had gone pale, almost translucent. Zoe got her hands under the edge of the plating and lifted. It didn't budge. She tried again, every muscle screaming. Nothing. Oxygen. 39%. Time. 16 seconds. She looked at the metal, looked at Lumi, looked at the hatch. So far away it might as well have been on another planet. And then Zoe did something profoundly stupid. She braced her back against a support pillar, got her feet under the plating and pushed with her legs. With everything she had. With every hour she'd spent in Earth's gravity wells. Every training run. Every stubborn refusal to quit that had gotten her this far. The plating shifted. Lumi slid free. Zoe grabbed them, threw the Ondari over her shoulder in a fireman's carry, and ran. Her oxygen hit 22%. Her vision started to gray at the edges. The hatch was ahead, somewhere in the smoke. She couldn't see it, could barely think. Her legs were moving on autopilot, muscle memory, pure animal refusal to stop. The bulkhead alarm was screaming now. Proximity warning, 10 seconds, 9 seconds. She hit the hatch at a full sprint, crashed through, sprawled across the corridor deck with Lumi still on her shoulder. The bulkhead slammed shut behind her with a boom that shook the entire platform. Zoe's oxygen counter hit 8%. Medical teams were rushing down the corridor, their forms blurry through her failing visor. Someone was pulling Lumi off her shoulder. Someone else was trying to remove her helmet. She let them. The helmet came off. The air tasted like recycled nothing, and it was the best thing she'd ever breathed. "Ma'am, are you—" Zoe didn't hear the rest. Her vision tunneled to black, and she fell into it gratefully. Zoe woke up in the medical bay 3 times. The first time didn't count because she was only conscious for about 6 seconds before the pain hit her like a freight train made of fire and regret, and she promptly passed out again. The second time, she managed to stay awake long enough to register that she was lying in a biobed, that everything hurt in ways she didn't know were possible, and that a Vrelian medic with too many arms was doing something to her chest that involved a lot of beeping equipment and concerned tentacle waving. The third time, she actually got words out. "Did they—" Her throat felt like she'd gargled broken glass. "The cadets. Alive." The voice came from her left. Human. Male. She turned her head. Slowly, because apparently her neck had decided to join the rebellion, and saw a man in a medical coat. "Dr. Hendricks," her brain supplied after a moment. "Earth Medical Liaison." "All 3 of them. Thanks to you." Zoe tried to nod, discovered that was a terrible idea, and settled for closing her eyes instead. "Good. Your oxygen levels dropped to critical. You have 2nd-degree burns across 18% of your body. Smoke inhalation. 3 cracked ribs. Your lungs?" He paused. Lieutenant, what you did was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. Yeah, Zoe rasped. Got that a lot growing up. He didn't laugh. Doctors rarely did, in her experience. They just gave you that look, the one that said you'd shaved years off your life expectancy. And they had the charts to prove it. She drifted off again. When she woke the fourth time, things were clearer. The pain had been dialed down to a manageable roar instead of a screaming symphony. Her burns were wrapped in some kind of Quilxian medical gel that smelled like mint and motor oil. The biobed was monitoring approximately 8,000 things about her body, none of which seemed to make the machines happy, judging by all the warning lights. Dr. Hendricks was gone. In his place was someone else, someone very much not human. Jim Laco stood at the foot of her bed, like a statue carved from obsidian and bad intentions. Fentari, reptilian, scales that gleamed under the medical bay lights, eyes that didn't blink quite right, and a posture that screamed predator even when standing still. He was also, Zoe's foggy brain recalled, a union official, high-ranking, the kind of person who didn't visit medical bays unless something important had happened. "Lieutenant," Jim Laco said. His voice was sibilant, precise. "You are conscious. This is acceptable." "Thanks," Zoe croaked. "I try." "I have questions." Of course he did. She tried to sit up, failed, settled for turning her head to look at him properly. "Shoot." "The 3 cadets. You retrieved them from the simulation chamber." "That's generally what happened, yeah. Protocol dictates evacuation of functional personnel first. Containment procedures cannot be delayed for retrieval of incapacitated individuals." He tilted his head, a gesture that looked distinctly wrong on that body. "You violated protocol." Zoe stared at him. "You came here to lecture me about protocol?" "I came here to understand. Your actions were inefficient, illogical. You risked your life, a valuable trained officer, for 3 cadets. Statistics suggest a high probability of total casualties had you attempted the rescue. But I didn't die. Irrelevant. The probability existed." "Well," Zoe said, her throat still burning, "probability can kiss my entire—" "You should have died." Jim Laco leaned forward slightly. "Your species is classified as Fragility Tier 3. The Quilxians are Tier 1. The Ondarii are Tier 2. You should not have been capable of moving them. The environment should have killed you in 30 seconds, yet you extracted all 3 and survived." Zoe was starting to understand. This wasn't a lecture. This was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or concern. Hard to tell with a species that had facial expressions like a granite cliff. "Humans are stubborn," she said finally. "We don't quit easy. Stubbornness is not a survival trait. It is a statistical anomaly that results in early mortality. And yet," she managed a weak smile. "Here I am." Jim Laco was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not softer. Fentari didn't do soft, but different. "Your species confounds the Union. You have no natural armor, no regenerative capabilities. Your atmospheric requirements are narrow. Your temperature tolerances are limited. By every metric, you should be a client species, dependent on protection from others. Thanks for the vote of confidence. And yet you run into fires. For individuals not of your species, not of your social group, for strangers." He leaned back. "This is not logical." Zoe closed her eyes. She was tired. So tired. "Look, I don't know what you want me to say. They were my responsibility. They needed help. So I helped. That's it." "That is not it." Jim Laco's tail twitched. "That is unprecedented." Before Zoe could respond, The medical bay doors hissed open. Dr. Hendricks was back, and he looked annoyed. Official Shimlako, the lieutenant needs rest, not interrogation. I am concluding. But the Fentari didn't move. He stared at Zoe with those unblinking eyes. The footage has been reviewed by Union Central. Your actions are being evaluated. Footage? Security recordings. The simulation chamber maintains visual logs. The entire rescue was documented. He turned to leave, paused at the door. The galaxy is watching, Lieutenant, whether you intended it or not. He left. Zoe looked at Dr. Hendricks. What did he mean? The galaxy is watching. The doctor grimaced. Someone leaked the security footage. It's on the Galactic network. 60 billion views at last count, and climbing. Oh. Zoe processed this. Oh no. Oh yes, she groaned. I'm never going to live this down, am I? Probably not. He checked one of the monitors, made an adjustment. For what it's worth, Earth is very proud of you. The networks back home are running the story non-stop. You're a hero. I'm an idiot who got lucky. Those aren't mutually exclusive, he smiled. Get some rest. You've got visitors waiting, but they can wait a bit longer. Visitors? 3 of them. Insectoid, amphibian, very anxious to see you. He headed for the door. I'll send them in later. For now, sleep. Zoe didn't argue. Sleep sounded excellent. She dreamed of fire. When she woke again, she'd lost count of which time this was. The medical bay was dimmer. Night cycle, probably. Her body still hurt, but it was a duller ache now. Background noise instead of center stage. And there were 3 figures standing at the foot of her bed. Hicksmoth stood perfectly still, all 4 arms at his sides. Kulapix was next to him, mandibles clicking softly. And Lumi. Lumi was practically vibrating with barely contained emotion, their jade skin bright with health. You are awake, Hicksmoth said. Statement, not question. Quilxians didn't waste words. Yeah. Zoe's voice was stronger now. You 3 okay? We are functional. Hicksmoth tilted his head. You sustained significant injury. This was not optimal. Yeah, well, neither was leaving you to die. Kulpix clicked her mandibles. Our protocols do not account for retrieval. Loss is accepted as inevitable in high-risk scenarios. That's a terrible protocol. It is efficient, Hicksmoth said. It's also wrong. Zoe pushed herself up to sitting, ignoring the protests from her ribs. You're not just statistics. You're people. You matter. Lumi made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or something in between. You nearly died. For us. Didn't die, though. Still here. But you could have. Lumi stepped closer. Our species. We can regenerate. If I had been left, I might have survived long enough for retrieval after containment. You could have saved only Hicksmoth and Kulpix. The risk assessment would have been more favorable. Zoe looked at the young Undari. I wasn't doing risk assessment. I was doing my job. Your job is to supervise training. Hicksmoth's compound eyes gleamed. Not to engage in unscheduled rescue operations with near-certain mortality outcomes. My job, Zoe said firmly, is to make sure you 3 come home. All 3. Not 2. Not 1. All. That's what it means to be human, I guess. We don't leave people behind. The 3 cadets looked at each other. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then Hicksmoth did something Zoe had never seen a Quilxian do. He bowed. Not a nod, not an acknowledgement. A full, formal bow, all 4 arms crossed over his chest. Kulpix did the same. Lumi followed, their whole body curving forward. We owe you life debt, Hicksmoth said. This is not translatable to human custom, but I get it. Zoe felt her throat tighten. You don't owe me anything. Just stay alive, okay? Make it worth it. They straightened. Lumi was definitely crying now, tears tracking down their jade skin. The Union is talking about you, Kulpix said quietly. About what you did. About what it means. What means? That humanity is in the Union now, Ixmoth said. And perhaps that changes everything. The footage went viral in a way that nothing in Galactic Network history had quite managed before. Sure, there had been popular uploads. The Great Vrelian Comedy Hour had pulled in 100 billion views over its 50-year run. The Fentari Diplomatic Choir's rendition of the Harmonic Convergence had broken records. Some Quilxian had once posted a video of themselves molting, and for reasons nobody could adequately explain, it had become a cultural phenomenon. But this was different. This was a human, a fragile, Tier 3, barely tolerated newcomer species, hauling 3 superior tier organisms through literal hellfire and coming out alive. The video was grainy. Security footage always was, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to see Zoe stumbling through the smoke. Clear enough to see her drag Ixmoth's considerable bulk toward safety. Clear enough to watch her go back in again and again when every other species on that platform had evacuated. Clear enough to see her lift that bulkhead plating off Lumi with nothing but her own 2 legs and what had to be pure, distilled stubbornness given physical form. The footage hit the network on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it had 12 billion views. By Saturday, that number had quintupled. Species from one end of the galaxy to the other were watching, rewatching, analyzing, arguing. Human social media lost its collective mind. Earth's networks ran the story 26 hours a day, which was impressive considering they only had 24 to work with. Talking heads dissected every frame. Politicians made speeches. Someone started selling T-shirts with a freeze frame of Zoe carrying Lumi through the fire, captioned, "Humanity, we don't do math." The shirts sold out in 3 hours. But it was the alien reactions that really mattered. On Quilx Prime, the insectoid homeworld, the footage played on public displays in the central hive. Quilxians didn't do emotion the way other species did. Their society ran on efficiency, on optimization, on the cold calculus of survival. But they understood debt. They understood value. And watching one of the fragile species risk everything to save 2 Quilxian cadets? That registered. The Hive Council issued a statement. It was brief, as Quilxian statements tended to be, action noted, value assessed, humanity, re-evaluation required. In Quilxian terms, that was practically a love letter. The Ondari response was more emotional. Their homeworld, Ondar, was an aquatic paradise where regeneration and adaptation were cultural cornerstones. They valued continuation, the endless cycle of growth and rebirth. But they'd never quite understood the concept of sacrifice. Why would you damage yourself for another when both of you could simply regenerate and try again later? Lumi's parents appeared on Ondari broadcast networks, their skin flushing through colors that indicated profound gratitude mixed with confusion. She nearly died, Lumi's primary parent said, gills fluttering. For our offspring, who she had known for less than 1 lunar cycle. We cannot. This is not something we have words for. But they tried anyway. Ondari poets began composing verses about the human who ran into fire. Philosophers debated the ethics of sacrifice versus regeneration. The entire species was having a collective moment of cultural introspection, all because one human had refused to leave a cadet behind. And then there was the Fentari reaction. Jim Locko watched the footage exactly once in his private quarters, then filed a report to Union Central that was 3,000 words long and boiled down to one essential point. Humanity was dangerous. Not dangerous in the traditional sense. Not militarily, not technologically. Humans were still centuries behind most Union species in both regards. No, they were dangerous because they were unpredictable. Because they operated on principles that didn't make sense. Because they would burn themselves alive for complete strangers. And that kind of irrationality was terrifying when you tried to model it strategically. His report included a phrase that would get quoted in Union policy meetings for the next decade. A species that does not calculate acceptable losses cannot have its behavior predicted. We must adjust our assessment parameters immediately. Which was Fentari 4, we have no idea what these humans will do next, and that scares us. The footage reached Union Central on platform Nexus 1, the administrative heart of the Galactic Union. The Central Council chambers were a massive amphitheater designed to accommodate 600 representatives from 83 member species. It smelled like a zoo that had made questionable life choices, which was what happened when you crammed that many different biochemistries into one room. The Council had been debating trade regulations, specifically the tariff rates on Vrelian textile exports. It was boring. Monumentally, historically boring. Half the representatives were asleep, which for some species meant actual hibernation. Then someone put the footage on the main display. The textile debate died instantly. 600 representatives watched in silence as Zoe pulled 3 cadets through fire. When it ended, the chamber erupted. "Propaganda!" hissed a Vrelian delegate, tentacles writhing. "Clearly staged." "Security footage cannot be staged," countered a Quilxian representative. "Timestamp and metadata confirm authenticity." Then the human was malfunctioning, mentally compromised. "Standard psychological evaluation shows no impairment," said an Ondari counselor, skin rippling with agitation. "She made a choice, consciously, deliberately." "An illogical choice." "Perhaps." This from a Fentari counselor, scales gleaming, but effective nonetheless. All 3 cadets survived. So did she. Results speak. The results are irrelevant. The probability of success was. "But she succeeded!" And Ondari was standing now, gills flared. "That is the point. Humans don't calculate probability. They calculate something else, something we don't have a word for." "Insanity," the Vrelian muttered. "We have a word for insanity." The debate raged for 6 hours. In the end, it wasn't the arguing that settled it. It was the numbers, the view counts, the public reaction. Billions of galactic citizens had watched that footage. They'd seen something that challenged every assumption about the fragile newcomers from Earth. And public opinion, even in a bureaucracy as massive as the Union, mattered. The vote was called on the 15th hour of debate. The motion, to inscribe Lieutenant Zoe Huxley into the Hero Archives. 208 in favor, 163 against, 29 abstentions. The motion passed. The Hero Archives were old. Older than most current species space programs. The Q Archive was a digital monument, a vast quantum database that existed simultaneously across 33 secured servers throughout Union space. It contained exactly 4,612 entries spanning 8,000 years of galactic history. Every entry was an act of valor so extraordinary, so undeniable, that the Union Council had voted to preserve it forever. There were warriors who'd held impossible positions against overwhelming odds. Scientists who'd sacrificed themselves to prevent catastrophes. Diplomats who'd walked into certain death to broker peace. The archives were sacred. Not in a religious sense. The Union was too diverse for unified religion, but in a cultural one. These were the acts that defined what it meant to be worthy of the stars. And humanity, in its 6 months of provisional membership, had never had an entry. Until now. The inscription process took 3 days. Archivists from a dozen species reviewed the footage, compiled reports, cross-referenced historical precedents. They debated wording, contextualized the action within human cultural frameworks and Union standards, fact-checked every detail. When they finished, the entry went live. On Earth, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. News networks interrupted regular programming. Social media platforms crashed under the traffic load. Governments issued statements. The UN Secretary-General gave a speech that made grown diplomats weep. Humanity had made it into the archives. They were no longer just the newest members, the probationary species, the fragile newcomers who needed to prove themselves. They were heroes. Well, one of them was, anyway. But that was a start. On platform Helix 9, in the medical bay, where Zoe was still recovering, the 3 cadets came back to visit. They brought something with them this time. "You need to see this," Lumi said, practically bouncing with excitement. They had a data tablet clutched in their webbed hands. Zoe was sitting up now, burns healing thanks to aggressive medical intervention and some Quilxian gel that worked miracles. She still looked like she'd lost a fight with a barbecue, but she could move without wanting to scream. Progress. See what? Hicksmoth took the tablet, tapped it with one of his 4 hands, and turned it toward her. "You have been inscribed." "Inscribed in what?" "The Hero Archives," Kolpik said quietly. Zoe stared at the screen. At first, the words didn't make sense. Her brain was still running on reduced capacity, pain medication doing fun things to her processing speed. Then the meaning filtered through. "Wait, the what?" "The Hero Archives," Lumi repeated. "The Union's historical record of extraordinary acts. You're in it now. You're the first human ever entered." "That's—" Zoe looked at the entry. Her name, the date, a summary of the rescue, video stills from the security footage, and at the bottom, a statement from the Council. She read it slowly. "Lieutenant Zoe Huxley, Human, Earth. On the date referenced, this individual violated established safety protocols to retrieve 3 incapacitated cadets from a compromised environment with near-certain mortality probability. Despite belonging to a Fragility Tier 3 species, Lieutenant Huxley successfully extracted 3 higher-tier individuals through sustained exposure to toxic atmosphere and extreme temperatures. When questioned regarding her motivations, Lieutenant Huxley stated she was doing her job. Analysis of human cultural frameworks suggests this species defines responsibility not through survival optimization, but through categorical refusal to abandon affiliated individuals, regardless of logical cost-benefit analysis. This behavior pattern, while statistically anomalous, resulted in 0 casualties and has prompted re-evaluation of humanity's role within the Union. The Council notes, humanity defines itself not by what it can endure, but by what it refuses to abandon. Zoe read it twice, then a 3rd time. "This is—" she trailed off. "I didn't do anything special. I just couldn't leave them." "That is the point," Hicksmoth said. "Most species could, would, do, regularly, in accordance with survival protocols. We left," Kolpix added softly. "The other supervisors, they evacuated, you did not. Because you were still in there." "Exactly." Lumi's skin was flushed bright with emotion. "You didn't calculate odds. You didn't weigh probabilities. You saw 3 people who needed help, and you helped. That's—" That's what makes it extraordinary. Zoe looked at the three of them, at the tablet, at the words that said she was a hero, which still felt deeply weird because she'd just done what anyone should do, right? Except apparently, anyone wouldn't do it. Humans would. And maybe that was the point. "So," she said eventually, "I'm famous now?" "Extremely," Lumi confirmed. "The footage has 80 billion views." "Oh, good. That's not terrifying at all." "Earth is very proud," Hicksmoth said. "Union assessment of humanity has shifted significantly. Political implications are substantial." "Fantastic. I almost die and become a political incident." "You almost die and prove humanity belongs in the stars," Colpix corrected. Zoe leaned back against her pillows, closed her eyes. "I just wanted to make sure you three came home." "We know," Lumi said softly. "The galaxy knows now, too." Zoe was discharged from the medical bay on a Monday morning, 6 weeks after the incident. 6 weeks of healing. 6 weeks of physical therapy that involved a Vrelian physiotherapist with 0 sympathy and approximately 800 tentacles that poked and prodded at her burns with clinical detachment. 6 weeks of interviews, statements, debriefings, and one extremely awkward conversation with Union Central, where a panel of officials asked her variations of, "But why, though?" for 90 minutes straight. She'd answered the same way every time, because they needed help. The officials never seemed satisfied with that answer. They kept waiting for something more, some elaborate philosophy, some grand human ideology. She didn't have one. She'd just done what needed doing. That seemed to confuse them more than anything else. Her discharge came with a medical clearance, a bottle of Quilxian pain medication that tasted like burning licorice, and strict instructions to take it easy for the next month. No heavy lifting, no combat simulations, no running into burning buildings. That last one was specific enough that she suspected Dr. Hendricks was making a point. She returned to her quarters on platform Helix 9, expecting things to be normal. Or as normal as they got when you lived on a space station that smelled like recycled air and poor life choices. Instead, she found a message waiting on her personal terminal. Priority flag. Official Union seal. She opened it. "Lieutenant Huxley, you are hereby requested to appear at Union Central Platform Nexus 1 on the 5th day of the next lunar cycle for a formal recognition ceremony. Attendance is mandatory. Transportation has been arranged. Dress uniform required. Formal recognition ceremony. Fantastic. She'd rather fight the fire again. The transport to Nexus 1 took 3 days. Zoe spent most of it reading messages from Earth. Her family had sent approximately 6,000 video calls, emails, and text messages, all variations on, "Are you okay?" and "We saw the video," and "You're insane, but we love you." Her mother's message was characteristically blunt. "You scared me half to death. Don't do it again." Also, very proud. "But seriously, don't." Zoe sent back a short reply. "Can't promise anything. Love you too." Nexus 1 was massive. The platform was less a station and more a small moon that someone had hollowed out and filled with bureaucracy. Docking procedures alone took 2 hours. Security checkpoints took another 3. By the time Zoe finally made it to her assigned quarters, she was exhausted and deeply regretting every life choice that had led her to this moment. The ceremony was scheduled for the following morning. She spent the evening pressing her dress uniform and trying not to throw up from nerves. When morning came, a Fentari escort arrived at her quarters. Not Shimlako, but another of his species, scales gleaming like polished obsidian. He introduced himself as Lixkano and spoke exactly 18 words during the entire walk to the ceremonial chamber. Follow me. Do not speak unless addressed. Stand when indicated. This way. The chamber was enormous. Vaulted ceilings that stretched up into darkness. Walls lined with displays showing the vastness of space. Stars wheeling in their ancient dance. And in the center, a raised platform surrounded by representatives from what looked like every species in the Union. Zoe's boots clicked on the polished floor as she walked. The sound echoed. 600 pairs of eyes, and eye equivalents, watched her approach. She kept her spine straight, her expression neutral, and tried very hard not to think about how much she wanted to be literally anywhere else. Lixcano gestured to a spot on the platform. Zoe stepped up, stood at attention. A Quilxian counselor stepped forward. Older, judging by the wear patterns on his exoskeleton. His voice, when he spoke, carried through the chamber without amplification. Lieutenant Zoe Huxley, human, Earth. You stand before the Union Council. Yes, Counselor. You have been inscribed in the Hero Archives. This is an honor bestowed upon fewer than 5,000 individuals in 8,000 years of recorded Union history. I understand, Counselor. Do you? The Quilxian tilted his head. Do you understand what this means? Not for you, but for your species? Zoe hesitated. I think so, Counselor. Then explain. Great. Pop quiz in front of 600 officials. Her favorite. She took a breath. Humanity is new to the Union. We're fragile compared to most member species. We're still learning the rules, still proving we belong here. What I did, what happened on Helix 9, it showed that humans might be fragile. But we're not. We don't quit. We don't abandon our people. I think that matters to the Union. I think it changes how you see us. The Quilxian was quiet for a moment. Then, an adequate assessment. Incomplete, but adequate. An Ondari counselor stepped forward, skin shifting through shades of blue. You risked your life for 3 individuals. Not for political gain, not for strategic advantage. Simply because, in your words, they needed help. Yes, Counselor. This is not behavior we have observed in other species. Even among the Ondari, who value community greatly, such actions are rare. We regenerate. We survive. We calculate continuation probability. The counselor's gills fluttered. You calculated nothing. You simply acted. With respect, Counselor, I did calculate. I calculated that leaving them wasn't an option. A ripple went through the chamber. Not sound exactly. More like a collective shift in attention. The Ondari counselor's skin flushed bright turquoise. That is not calculation. That is conviction. Maybe, Zoe said, but it's how humans work. We're stubborn like that. A sound that might have been laughter came from somewhere in the assembly. Hard to tell with species that communicated in clicks, whistles, and subsonic rumbles. Then Shimlako stepped forward. Of course he did. The Fentari official looked exactly as she remembered. Calculating, cold, predatory. Lieutenant, he said, when we last spoke, I told you the galaxy was watching. I remember, Counselor. They are still watching. The footage of your rescue has been viewed by over 100 billion individuals. Humanity's provisional status within the Union has been reconsidered. Your species is no longer considered fragility, Tier 3. You have been reclassified. Zoe blinked. To what? Tier uncertain. Because we no longer know how to measure you. Jimlako's tail twitched. Physical fragility remains, but operational capacity under duress exceeds predictive models. Your species violates our assessment frameworks. Is that good? That is complicated. He stared at her with those unblinking eyes. But It is necessary. The Union must adapt to account for human behavior patterns. You have forced this adaptation, Lieutenant, whether you intended to or not." Before Zoe could respond, the chamber doors opened. 3 figures entered: Hicksmoth, Colpix, and Lumi, all in formal dress uniforms that looked deeply uncomfortable on their non-humanoid frames. They walked to the platform, stood beside Zoe. Hicksmoth spoke first. "The Union Council has permitted us to make a statement." "Oh no," Zoe muttered under her breath. "We speak as the individuals retrieved from the Helix 9 incident, as those who would have died without intervention." His compound eyes fixed on Zoe. "Lieutenant Huxley violated protocol. This is accurate. She acted illogically. This is also accurate. But she saved 3 lives at immense personal cost. And in doing so, she demonstrated what humanity contributes to this union." Colpix stepped forward. "Other species calculate survival. Humans calculate worth. We are grateful. Our species are grateful. The galaxy should know. Humanity does not abandon its people." Lumi's skin was flushed so bright they practically glowed. "I was trapped. Dying. I knew I was dying. And then she came back. Through fire. Through smoke. Through impossible odds. She came back because I mattered. Because we all mattered." Tears tracked down their jade skin. "That is what it means to be human. That is what they give us." The chamber was silent. Then, slowly, the Quilxian counselor raised all 4 arms in salute. One by one, the other counselors followed. Each species had their own gesture of respect, and Zoe watched as 600 representatives performed them simultaneously. It was overwhelming, humbling, terrifying. She stood at attention, accepted it, and tried very hard not to cry in front of the entire Union Council. When it finished, the ceremony concluded with formal words, official pronouncements, all the bureaucratic pageantry that made governments function. Zoe barely heard it. Her mind was elsewhere. Later, back in her quarters, she accessed the hero archives from her personal terminal, found her entry, read it again. The final line still hit her. "Humanity defines itself not by what it can endure, but by what it refuses to abandon." She looked out the viewport at the stars beyond, at Earth, somewhere out there in the black, at the future spreading out before humanity like an unwritten book. They'd made it. Into the Union. Into the archives. Into history. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because when someone needed help, they helped. Even if it hurt. Even if the odds were bad. Even if protocol said otherwise. Especially then. Zoe closed the archive display, leaned back, and smiled. Stubborn. Illogical. Unpredictable. Yeah, she thought. That sounded about right. That sounded like humanity. And the galaxy was just going to have to deal with it.